The data crystal spun slowly in high prelate Forlag's spindly fingers, its translucent surface catching the dim blue light of his private chambers. Classified archives were rarely accessed in the Cthar Dominion. Information deemed potentially destabilizing to the carefully calibrated social order was sequestered away, accessible only to those of sufficient rank and neural certification. Forlag possessed both, yet hesitated. The energy signatures detected near the outer boundary of Cthar space troubled him. Initial scans indicated a civilization expanding at an exponential rate, far faster than the careful, measured growth that had characterized the Cthar's 10,000 years of interstellar development. Such rapid expansion suggested recklessness, unpredictability, chaos, qualities anathema to Cthar society. The preliminary analysis had matched the signature to species designation H001. Humans. Forlag inserted the crystal into the reader. The holographic display flickered to life, bathing his chitinous exoskeleton in pale light. The file opened with a stark warning. Information contained herein is classified priority alpha under Galactic Concordat Protocol 7293 Theta. Unauthorized access or dissemination is punishable by neural recalibration. Forlag's compound eyes scanned the introduction, his mind processing the information with typical Cthar efficiency. What he found, or rather, what he didn't find, disturbed him deeply. The file was riddled with redactions. Entire sections blacked out, data points removed, analysis summaries abbreviated or missing entirely. What remained painted a confusing, contradictory picture. Humans were categorized as carbon-based bipedal mammals of moderate physical capabilities. Their homeworld, designated Sol 3, was remarkable only for its extreme environmental diversity, from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts, toxic swamplands to temperate forests. The Cthar scientific assessment noted that humans lacked natural armor, possessed no inherent weapons beyond blunt appendages, and demonstrated unremarkable strength-to-mass ratios. By all logical metrics, they should be a minor species of negligible concern. Yet the file contained an addendum detailing two civilizations that had existed near human space, the Axolotl hegemony and the Perdition Collective, both of which had vanished completely approximately 2 Earth centuries ago. The correlation analysis showing human expansion into those regions was marked with the highest threat designation in the Cthar classification system. Most troubling was the final notation. All species-level interaction with H001 is governed by Standing Observation Mandate, as established by Galactic Concordat Emergency Session 497b. Observation Mandate. Forlags Antenne twitched, a polite term for quarantine. Computer. Forlag's voice echoed in the empty chamber. Provide all available information on Galactic Concordat Emergency Session 497b. The system hummed briefly before responding. Information restricted. Verification required. Forlag completed the neural authentication, pressing his cranial receptor against the verification plate. Access granted. Limited information available. Emergency Session 497. B was convened 214 standard cycles ago following the Cygnus incident. Primary outcome: implementation of the Human Observation Mandate. Full proceedings sealed by unanimous vote of the Concordat High Council. The Cygnus incident? Forlag had never heard of it, despite his extensive historical education and high clearance. Computer defines Cygnus incident. Information restricted beyond current authorization level. This was unprecedented. Forlag's rank should allow access to all historical records. The Cthar valued knowledge above all else. Restriction of information was reserved for only the most sensitive military intelligence or potentially destabilizing cultural data. Forlag's logical mind considered the options. The standard protocols were clear. Report the anomalous energy signatures to the High Council and await further instructions. But the extensive redactions suggested the High Council might not possess complete information either. There was another option, though unconventional. Elder Xyler had been a junior diplomatic attaché during the formation of the Galactic Concordat. If anyone might possess first-hand knowledge of humans beyond the official records, it would be him. The journey to Elder Xyler's dwelling took Forlag through the spiraling architecture of the capital nexus. The ancient Cthar moved slowly now. His once iridescent exoskeleton faded to a dull gray, but his mind remained sharp. High Prelate, Xyler's voice rasped as he welcomed Forlag into his meditation chamber. Your visit is unexpected. I seek information, Elder, about species H001. Humans. Xyler's compound eyes flickered, the Cthar equivalent of surprise. An unusual interest. What prompts this inquiry? Energy signatures. Matching human expansion patterns have been detected near our outer territories. The archive data is heavily redacted. I find this illogical. Xyler moved to a private terminal, deactivating the ambient monitoring systems. Another surprising action. Privacy was rarely sought among the communally minded Cthar. What I tell you is not recorded in our archives, Forlag. Not because of deception, but because some truths defy our methods of categorization. Xyler's mandibles clicked softly. What do you know of humans? Very little. Physically unimpressive bipedal mammals. Highly variable phenotypes. Originate from a Class M world with extreme environmental diversity. Yes, those are the facts. But facts alone do not explain why the 17 most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy unanimously agreed to quarantine them. Xyler manipulated the controls of an ancient memory device, and a holographic display flickered to life between them. I attended the emergency session as a junior observer. The proceedings were sealed not to hide information, but because the information itself was deemed potentially hazardous to logical species like ourselves. The hologram showed a primitive human settlement, structures of wood and stone, beings wrapped in animal skins wielding simple tools. This is humanity approximately 3,000 years ago by their calendar. Pre-industrial, pre-spaceflight, barely harnessing the fundamental forces of their world. The image shifted to show a human vessel in space, crude by Cthar standards. This is humanity 60 Earth years after the previous image. They progressed from primitive combustion engines to rudimentary spaceflight in less than a single generation. No other known species has compressed technological development at this rate without external influence. Forlag's analytical mind immediately identified the anomaly. Such acceleration defies standard developmental models. Indeed, but technological development alone was not what concerned the Concordat. Xyler manipulated the controls again. During early observation, we discovered humans spent significant resources creating fictional simulations, what they call entertainment. The hologram displayed crude human visual media, primitive dramatizations. Over 40% of these entertainments involve scenarios of interspecies conflict, invasion, or galactic warfare, despite humanity having no confirmation of extraterrestrial intelligence at the time. They obsessively rehearsed hypothetical first contacts and conflicts, often casting themselves as either saviors or victims who ultimately triumph against overwhelming odds. Forlag processed this. They prepared for a scenario they had no evidence would occur. Precisely. While our species developed spaceflight to explore and expand logically, humans developed it partially motivated by fictional threats and opportunities they had imagined. Xyler's voice lowered. But these peculiarities were merely curiosities until the Cygnus incident. The hologram shifted again, showing what appeared to be a crystalline structure of immense complexity. This was the Vlisk Collective, a silicon-based hive intelligence that established territory near what we now know was the edge of human-explored space. The Vlisk encountered a human exploratory vessel that had strayed beyond their known territories. The image showed the human ship, tiny compared to the vast crystalline structures surrounding it. The Vlisk, operating on pure logical assessment, determined humans to be a potential competitor species and calculated a 99.9% probability of successful assimilation. They captured the human vessel and began their standard procedure of neural mapping prior to biological conversion. Xyler paused, his compound eyes dimming slightly. What happened next defies Kthar understanding. The humans, recognizing assimilation was inevitable, initiated something they called Operation Chimera. They transmitted what appeared to be a voluntary neural surrender, opening their ship's databases and the minds of the crew to the Vlisk Collective. The hologram showed data streams flowing from a human vessel to the Vlisk structure. But it was not surrender. The humans had deliberately filled their databases and prepared their minds with the most contradictory, paradoxical, emotionally charged, and illogical content from their accumulated history. Religious texts alongside nihilistic philosophy, incompatible mathematical theorems, visual illusions designed to create cognitive dissonance, emotionally traumatic imagery paired with euphoric sensory data. The crystalline structure in the hologram began to pulse erratically. The Vlisk collective consciousness, which had evolved to incorporate and process information logically, experienced the equivalent of a massive systemic psychosis. The entire collective, a civilization spanning 17 star systems, collapsed into irreversible computational chaos within 14 standard cycles. Forlag's antennae went rigid with shock. A single ship destroyed an entire civilization, not through weapons or technology, but by weaponizing their own irrationality. The Vlisk had no defense against deliberate cognitive paradox because no logical species would ever conceive of such an attack vector. It would be like Xyler's search for an analogy, like deliberately infecting yourself with a plague to defeat an enemy through contagion. The implications were staggering. Kthar military doctrine, like that of most advanced species, was built on technological superiority, resource optimization, and logical cost-benefit analysis. How could one defend against an enemy willing to employ strategies that harmed themselves in the process? This was not the only incident, Xyler continued. The Ryland Confederacy encountered humans approximately 30 Earth years after the Vlisk incident. The encounter began peacefully, cultural exchange, limited trade. But a resource dispute arose over an uninhabited system. The hologram shifted to show sleek, arthropod-like vessels, Ryland ships, exchanging fire with bulkier human craft. The human ships appeared outmatched, several disintegrating under Ryland weapons. The Rylands possessed superior technology and won the initial conflict decisively. The disputed system was of minimal strategic importance to humans. A logical species would have calculated the cost of continued conflict and withdrawn. Xyler's voice grew softer. The Rylands had inadvertently destroyed a human colony vessel during the conflict, one containing primarily non-combatants and juvenile humans. They expected, at most, a proportional retaliatory strike followed by diplomatic overtures. The hologram now showed human vessels of dramatically different design, larger, more angular, bristling with weapons systems that hadn't been present in the earlier engagement. The humans didn't retaliate immediately. They withdrew completely for almost 2 Earth years. The Rylands assumed the matter concluded. Then, without warning or declaration, human forces struck not at the disputed system, but at 6 key Ryland infrastructure worlds simultaneously. The display showed the systematic destruction of Ryland orbital facilities, ground installations, and defensive emplacements. This wasn't a proportional response or a strategic military campaign by any recognized doctrine. The humans didn't occupy territory or extract resources. They methodically eliminated the Rylands' ability to project power or sustain their civilization. Images of planet-scale destruction appeared, not total annihilation, but precise targeting of specific environmental systems. They deployed self-replicating terraforming suppressors calibrated specifically to Ryland biology, rendering 27 worlds uninhabitable to Rylands, but leaving them viable for potential human settlement. The message they broadcast on all frequencies was simply, never again. Forlag struggled to process the implications. They destroyed an entire civilization over a single incident. They eliminated what they perceived as an existential threat based on a demonstrated willingness to harm their offspring. The Rylan Confederacy had been a stable interstellar power for over 600 years. They ceased to exist as a unified entity within 3 standard cycles of the human campaign. Xyler manipulated the controls one final time, and the hologram displayed the proceedings of what must have been the Concordat emergency session, representatives of various species in heated debate. When these incidents were brought before the Concordat, 17 member civilizations, species that had been engaged in bitter disputes and even limited warfare for millennia, unanimously agreed to quarantine human space. Not out of fear of their technology, which remains relatively crude, but fear of their psychology. The hologram faded, leaving the two Cthar in dim blue light. That is why the archives are redacted, Forlag, not to hide facts, but because the facts themselves represent a cognitive danger to species like ours. Humans don't operate according to logical risk assessment or resource optimization. They operate on principles entirely foreign to us: emotional response, pattern recognition through narrative, and what they call moral imperatives that supersede rational self-interest. Forlag's mind raced, attempting to incorporate this new information into his understanding of the universe. If they're so dangerous, why were they not eliminated? The combined might of the Concordat could have contained them while they were still developing. That proposal was indeed raised, Xyler admitted, and rejected for 2 reasons. First, attempting to eliminate humans might simply trigger the very response we feared, a species-wide never-again reaction. But more importantly, Xyler activated one final hologram, showing a Cthar suffering from neural degradation, a hereditary condition that had plagued their species for millennia, then shifting to show a healthy Cthar. The timestamp indicated the images were separated by mere cycles. Shortly after the quarantine was implemented, human representatives approached the Concordat with this, a targeted retroviral therapy that completely cures chitinous neural degradation syndrome, a condition our own medical science had deemed untreatable. Forlag stared in disbelief. They developed a cure for a Cthar-specific genetic disorder during quarantine? How? They would have had minimal biological samples. They created it using only the limited genetic data exchanged during first contact procedures before the quarantine. When asked why they would expend resources developing medicine for a species that had helped confine them, their representatives said, Xyler seemed to have difficulty translating the concept. They did it because it was hard, because the challenge itself had value, and because understanding us might help them understand themselves. The implications were staggering. The same species capable of calculated xenocide had also spent countless resources curing another species' genetic disorder, with no guarantee of reciprocity or reward. Our standard threat assessment models cannot accommodate such contradiction, Xyler concluded. And that, High Prelate, is why the data is redacted. Human behavior operates on axes entirely foreign to Cthar logic: challenge, empathy, vengeance, legacy, guilt. The Concordat determined that incomplete information was better than information that might lead to fundamentally flawed analysis. Forlag's antennae drooped slightly as he processed this revelation. Then the energy signatures we've detected represent a critical situation, Xyler finished. The human observation mandate has apparently ended or been circumvented. We must inform the High Council immediately. The emergency session of the Cthar High Council convened within a single diurnal cycle, unprecedented speed for a society that prided itself on careful deliberation. Forlag presented his findings, supplemented by Elder Xyler's first-hand accounts, to the 7 archprelates who governed Cthar civilization. The data is conclusive, Forlag concluded. Human expansion patterns indicate they will reach the Orion Cygnus tributaries within 12 cycles. We must determine an appropriate response. Archprelate Zex, eldest of the council, steepled his finger appendages. Your assessment of human psychology is troubling, yet incomplete. If they are as unpredictable as you suggest, any policy we develop may prove inadequate. With respect, Archprelate, Forlag countered, Unpredictability itself can be quantified and incorporated into strategic planning. We need not predict specific human actions to prepare for the range of possible. The chamber's alert system interrupted, bathing the council room in pulsing crimson light. Priority communication from Galactic Concordat High Command announced the automated system. Classification: Existential Threat Advisory. The main display activated, showing a Medusan representative, one of the Concordat's founding species. The Medusan's translucent, gelatinous form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns indicating extreme distress. Attention all Concordat members and associated civilizations. This is not a test or simulation. Approximately 72 standard hours ago, our long-range monitoring stations detected a massive energy distortion entering the galaxy from intergalactic space. The phenomenon has since been classified as a von Neumann-class self-replicating autonomous system of unknown origin. The display shifted to show a visualization of the galaxy, with a rapidly growing darkness spreading from the outer rim. The entity is consuming all matter in its path to fuel its expansion. It disassembles planetary bodies, stellar material, and artificial structures at the molecular level. Current spread rate indicates total galactic consumption within 18 standard cycles. Murmurs of alarm, rare in Cthar proceedings, rippled through the council chamber. All conventional defensive measures have proven ineffective. The Concordat High Command has initiated Emergency Protocol Omega. All member civilizations are advised to implement survival contingencies. More information will be provided as the transmission abruptly terminated. Silence filled the chamber for precisely 7.3 seconds, an eternity in Cthar deliberative processes. Verification, demanded Archprelate Zex. Confirmed authentic, responded the security system. Transmission originated from Concordat Central Command using valid encryption protocols. Preliminary analysis. Zex turned to the Council's science advisor. If the reported consumption rate is accurate, and assuming constant expansion, Cthar space will be reached in approximately 14 standard cycles. Our understanding of von Neumann-class threats suggests conventional weapons will be ineffective due to the distributed nature of the system. Survival probability? Asked another archprelate. Calculating based on available data. The science advisor's antennae twitched as he processed the variables. Cthar civilization's survival probability, 17.8% under optimal defensive deployment. Individual survival through controlled societal hibernation, 42.3%. The logical course is clear, Zex declared. We must implement the Deep Archive Protocol. Selected population segments will enter stasis in shielded facilities beneath the mantles of designated refuge worlds. Cultural and scientific data will be preserved. When the threat has passed or exhausted itself, Cthar civilization can re-emerge. A chorus of agreement emanated from the council, all except Forlag. Archprelates, I must propose an alternative strategy. Forlag's voice cut through the consensus. Recent intelligence suggests the human quarantine has indeed been breached. Human expansion has reached the edge of Cthar space. I propose we immediately establish contact with human authorities. For what purpose? Demanded Zex. If your assessment of their psychology is accurate, they are unpredictable and potentially hostile. Precisely because they are unpredictable, Forlag countered. The von Neumann threat operates on predictable parameters: consumption, replication, expansion. All logical species respond to such threats with equally predictable defensive measures, which have proven ineffective. Humans, however, specialize in asymmetrical problem-solving and have demonstrated capacity for solutions that transcend conventional strategic doctrine. You suggest we place the survival of our species in the hands of an unpredictable, quarantined civilization? Zex's tone conveyed clear disapproval. I suggest we recognize that logical approaches have been calculated to fail. The definition of logic itself requires us to consider alternatives when established parameters yield unacceptable probabilities. Elder Zeiler, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, now spoke. High Prelate Forlag's assessment has merit. My experience with humans suggests they possess unique cognitive frameworks for addressing extinction-level threats. Their fictional simulations, which we dismissed as wasteful entertainment, have allowed them to rehearse responses to scenarios no logical species would allocate resources to considering. The council chamber fell silent as the archprelates processed this unorthodox proposal. The logical course remains societal hibernation, Zex finally declared. However, strategic diversification increases survival probability. High Prelate Forlag, you're authorized to establish limited contact with human authorities to evaluate possible collaborative defense. The remaining council will oversee deep archive implementation. Forlag acknowledged the directive with a formal gesture. I require a vessel and diplomatic contingent. Granted, Zex replied. But be warned, if humans prove as dangerous as your own assessment suggests, you may be initiating contact with a civilization more threatening than the von Neumann entity itself. The human diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri was a sprawling, asymmetrical structure that defied Cthar architectural sensibilities. Where Cthar design emphasized mathematical precision and functional efficiency, the human facility appeared almost organic. Modules added haphazardly as needed, with little apparent concern for overall aesthetic harmony. Forlag's diplomatic vessel, the logical progression, maintained position at the designated coordinates as clearance procedures were completed. His compound eyes studied the human station through the view screen, noting details that conflicted with expected patterns. Weapons emplacements were visible yet minimally deployed. Defensive shield generators were active but operating at reduced capacity. Either humans possessed far superior technology than intelligence suggested, or they were displaying an irrational lack of caution. We are receiving transmission from a human facility, reported the communications officer. They are welcoming us aboard and express excitement at the opportunity for dialogue. Excitement, an emotional state of heightened anticipation, irrelevant to diplomatic procedure, yet apparently significant enough for humans to communicate it as part of official contact protocol. Acknowledge their transmission and prepare the diplomatic contingent, Forlag ordered. The docking procedure reinforced Forlag's impression of human unpredictability. The process included redundant safety measures alongside seemingly cavalier procedural gaps. Atmosphere composition was verified 3 separate times, yet the human docking master made manual adjustments to the alignment that deviated from standard parameters by 0.03 degrees, an imprecision no Cthar operator would tolerate. When the airlock cycled open, Forlag experienced his first direct exposure to humans. 2 representatives stood waiting, a tall, pale-skinned female with head filaments colored an unnatural red, and a shorter, dark-skinned male with facial hair. Both wore uniforms of blue and gold that appeared ceremonial rather than functional. High Prelate Forlag, the female spoke, attempting a Cthar greeting gesture that was approximately 82% accurate. I'm Ambassador Sophia Nakamura, and this is Scientific Liaison Dr. Marcus Washington. On behalf of the United Earth Government, welcome to Proxima Station. Forlag performed the appropriate response gesture. Your welcome is acknowledged, Ambassador Nakamura. The urgency of our situation necessitates directness. The galaxy faces an extinction-level threat of unprecedented scale. The 2 humans exchanged glances, a nonverbal communication method Forlag had been briefed on but found inefficient. We're aware of the situation, High Prelate, Dr. Washington responded. Concordat emergency broadcasts reached our monitoring stations approximately 43 hours ago. We've already initiated our response protocols. Forlag's antennae twitched in surprise. You've received Concordat transmissions? The observation mandate was officially lifted 6 standard months ago, Ambassador Nakamura interjected. Though we've maintained limited contact with most former Concordat species during the transition period. If you'll follow us to the conference room, Our response team is assembled and prepared to brief you on current containment efforts. Forlag followed the humans through corridors that epitomized their contradictory nature. Cutting-edge technology operated alongside archaic mechanical systems. Spaces designed for optimal efficiency adjoined areas clearly dedicated to non-functional recreational purposes. Most puzzling were the abundant visual displays of what appeared to be artistic renderings, images and sculptures that served no apparent purpose. The conference room contained 8 additional humans of varying phenotypes, surrounded by holographic displays showing the expanding threat. What immediately struck Forlag was the atmosphere. Cthar strategic sessions were characterized by ordered, sequential analysis. This human gathering had the chaotic energy of a hive disturbed by predators. High Prelate, allow me to introduce Commander Elena Vasquez, Strategic Response Coordinator. Ambassador Nakamura gestured to a stern-faced female studying tactical displays. Prelate Forlag. The commander acknowledged without the expected diplomatic courtesies. Your timing is fortuitous. We're implementing Phase 2 countermeasures within the next 6 hours and could use Cthar analytical support for probability mapping. I have not yet agreed to any collaborative effort, Forlag noted. My authorization extends only to information exchange and potential coordination. Commander Vasquez's facial muscles contracted in what human behavioral guides identified as impatience. With respect, Prelate, we don't have time for diplomatic niceties. That thing out there is consuming matter at an exponential rate. The Concordat's response has been exactly what you'd expect. Orderly, logical withdrawal to defensive positions, which are being systematically dismantled. We're implementing alternative strategies, and frankly, we need Cthar processing capability to refine our models. Forlag was taken aback by both the directness and the implicit criticism of logical response patterns. Perhaps you could outline these alternative strategies, he suggested. Commander Vasquez gestured, and the central holographic display expanded to show a multi-layered tactical simulation. We've designated the entity as Prometheus for operational purposes. Conventional weapons are ineffective due to its distributed processing and molecular disassembly capabilities. The Medusan fleet attempted concentrated energy bombardment. Prometheus absorbed the energy and accelerated its expansion by 7%. The display showed the failed Medusan engagement. Forlag noted the predictable, orderly formation of the Concordat vessels, and their equally predictable destruction. Our analysis suggests Prometheus operates on fundamental physical principles. It cannot violate conservation of energy or matter, but it can manipulate matter-energy conversion with unprecedented efficiency. Conventional defensive or offensive strategies treat it as an enemy to be defeated. We're approaching it as a system to be disrupted or redirected. The display shifted to show a fleet of human vessels unlike any in the tactical database. Their configurations defied standard classification. Some appeared to be primarily massive energy collectors. Others were little more than frameworks surrounding what appeared to be singularity generators. The Lazarus Fleet, Commander, Vasquez explained, 217 vessels constructed or retrofitted within the past 38 hours. Each equipped with modified gravitational manipulation technology originally designed for stellar harvesting operations. You constructed a fleet in less than 2 standard cycles. Forlag couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Repurposed, mostly, Dr. Washington clarified. Civilian, scientific, and military resources pooled under Condition Omega protocols. Condition Omega, extinction-level threat response. Commander Vasquez stated flatly, all human resources, governmental, corporate, private, are automatically conscripted. All research restrictions are suspended. All developmental safeguards are bypassed. Maximum output at any cost. The implications were staggering. No Cthar could conceive of suspending safety protocols or regulatory oversight. The potential for catastrophic outcomes would make such a policy irrational by definition. And these vessels, this Lazarus fleet, what strategy will they employ? Forlag asked. Commander Vasquez manipulated the display to show a simulation of the fleet engaging the Prometheus entity. The entity's expansion relies on converting matter to energy, then using that energy to power further conversion. We're going to give it indigestion. Dr. Washington stepped forward. Prometheus functions through quantum tunneling at the molecular level, essentially creating microscopic wormholes to disassemble matter instantly. Our fleet will deploy modified singularity generators, creating overlapping gravity wells specifically calibrated to disrupt quantum tunneling frequencies. The simulation showed the human vessels forming a three-dimensional lattice around the leading edge of the entity's expansion. Phase 1, containment, has a 34% probability of success, Commander Vasquez continued. If successful, Phase 2 implements directed singularity injection. We introduce artificial microsingularities directly into the entity's processing matrix, forcing it to expend energy managing gravitational disruption rather than expansion. Such technology would require energy output beyond current theoretical limits, Forlag objected. Hence the stellar harvesters, Dr. Washington explained. We're converting 3 red dwarf stars into direct energy injection. Gas giants and affected systems are being repurposed as fusion material. Forlag's mind struggled to process the scale of the operation. You're sacrificing entire star systems? Uninhabited systems, Ambassador Nakamura clarified. But yes, Condition Omega prioritizes galactic survival over resource conservation. The probability of success? Forlag asked. Commander Vasquez's expression shifted to what humans called a grim smile. Phase 2 success probability, 23%. Phase 3, redirecting Prometheus back to intergalactic space through manufactured space-time curvature, 17%. Complete neutralization, 8%. Those probabilities are unacceptably low by any logical standard, Forlag stated. Compared to what alternative? Commander Vasquez challenged. The Concordat's withdrawal strategy has a calculated 0% survival rate. The Cthar hibernation approach might preserve a fraction of your species, but guarantees the loss of your civilization and most of your population. Our models show a 42.3% survival probability through controlled hibernation, Forlag countered. Your models assume Prometheus won't adapt to detect subsurface habitation or won't simply consume your planet's whole. Dr. Washington replied. Our analysis of its behavior pattern suggests otherwise. Forlag found himself in an unprecedented situation. The human plan defied logical risk assessment, committing vast resources to a strategy with minimal probability of success. Yet their analysis of alternative approaches was troublingly sound. Why pursue a strategy with such limited probability of success? He finally asked. The resource allocation alone, destroying stars, consuming gas giants, represents an extraordinary expenditure for minimal expected return. The human representatives exchanged glances again. Because 8% is not 0%, Commander Vasquez said simply. And because humans don't accept extinction scenarios as inevitable, regardless of the calculated probabilities. It's who we are, Dr. Washington added. Throughout our history, we've faced situations with seemingly insurmountable odds. Natural disasters, pandemics, environmental collapse, civilizational conflict. Our most significant achievements have come when logical analysis would have suggested surrender or withdrawal. Ambassador Nakamura stepped forward. High Prelate, we understand the Cthar commitment to logical process. We respect it, but we're asking you to consider that in truly unprecedented scenarios, conventional logic itself may become a limitation. Sometimes the 8% chance is the only one worth taking. Forlags analytical mind. Process their arguments. By strict Cthar reasoning, committing resources to an 8% probability when a 42.3% alternative existed was irrational. But the human assessment of the hibernation strategy's flaws was sound. If their analysis of Prometheus's adaptive capabilities was accurate, the actual survival probability might be far lower than Cthar models projected. What assistance do you require from the Cthar Dominion? He finally asked. The relief in the human expressions was evident. Your computational systems are still superior to ours in certain applications, Dr. Washington explained. Specifically, quantum probability mapping and gravitational dynamics modeling. With Kthar analytical support, we believe we can improve our Phase 2 success probability by as much as 14%. Additionally, Commander Vasquez added, Kthar vessels utilize crystalline lattice shield harmonics that might be adapted to disrupt Prometheus's quantum tunneling capabilities. We need at least a battle group for field testing. The request exceeded Forlag's authorization, committing Kthar vessels to a human-led operation with minimal success probability contradicted every strategic principle his civilization embraced. Yet the logic of extinction created its own imperatives. I will need to consult with the High Council, Forlag stated, but I will advocate for limited technological and analytical support. Limited support increases our success probability to approximately 12%, Commander Vasquez noted. Full Kthar integration, committing your fleet to a coordinated effort, would raise it to nearly 19%. No logical argument justifies risking our entire civilization on a 19% probability, Forlag countered. Ambassador Nakamura's expression softened. High Prelate, if I may, this is precisely why the Concordat established the observation mandate all those years ago. Not because humans are inherently dangerous, but because we represent a cognitive approach that can seem irrational to logical species. When extinction looms, the calculus changes, Dr. Washington added. For humans, a 19% chance of saving everything is always preferable to a 42% chance of saving a fragment. Because you prioritize your civilization over your species, Forlag realized. We prioritize possibility over certainty, Commander Vasquez corrected. Even negative certainty. It's not just our civilization we're fighting for. It's yours, the Medusans, the Arcturians, every sentient species in the galaxy. We'd rather burn out trying to save everyone than survive by sacrificing anyone. In that moment, Forlag understood what Elder Zyler had tried to convey. Human danger and human value lay not in their technology or physical capabilities, but in their fundamental rejection of limitations, even those imposed by reality itself. I will consult with the High Council immediately, he decided. What followed was an unprecedented alliance between the meticulously logical Kthar and the chaotically innovative humans. The High Council, swayed by Forlag's analysis and the growing recognition that conventional approaches were failing, committed 30% of the Kthar fleet to the human-led operation, a compromise between full integration and the limited support initially proposed. For Forlag, the subsequent weeks were a study in controlled chaos. The human command structure defied Kthar organizational principles at every level. Authority flowed not through rigid hierarchies, but through constantly shifting networks of expertise. Specialists were promoted to leadership positions and demoted again as operational needs changed. Ideas were evaluated not by the rank of their originator, but by their potential effectiveness, regardless of source. Most disturbing to Forlag's Kthar sensibilities was the human's relationship to failure. Where Kthar culture treated failure as a terminal state to be avoided at all costs, humans incorporated it directly into their development process. Rapid iteration through controlled failure. Dr. Washington explained as they observed a simulation crash spectacularly for the 27th time. Each collapse gives us data points we couldn't obtain through theoretical modeling. Deliberate failure is inefficient, Forlag objected. Theoretical models can be refined to account for known variables, Commander Vasquez interrupted. But Prometheus operates on principles we're still discovering. Sometimes you need to poke the bear to see how it reacts. Poke the bear. Forlag's translator struggled with the idiom. Intentionally provoke a dangerous entity to observe its response patterns, Dr. Washington clarified. It's a research technique with ancient roots in human scientific methodology. This approach extended beyond the laboratory. As the Lazarus fleet engaged the outer tendrils of Prometheus, human commanders authorized what they called experimental deployments, essentially sacrificing vessels to test response patterns. Cathar military doctrine would never permit such apparent waste. Yet each lost ship provided crucial data that incrementally improved tactical models. Most astonishing to Forlag was the human capacity for adaptation. When initial singularity harmonics proved less effective than projected, entire vessel systems were redesigned and retrofitted within days. Engineering teams worked without rest cycles, sustained by chemical stimulants that would have been strictly prohibited under normal circumstances. Condition Omega protocols override standard medical safety parameters, explained the fleet's chief medical officer when Forlag expressed concern about the human's physical state. We can repair the damage later, assuming there is a later. The willingness to accept certain harm for uncertain benefit violated every principle of Cathar risk assessment. Yet Forlag could not deny the results. In 14 days, the Human Cathar coalition achieved what the Concordat's conventional approach had failed to accomplish in months. Prometheus's expansion rate had decreased by 3.7%. It was a minor victory in absolute terms, but a profound psychological one. Across species and civilizations, the news that the entity could be affected at all sparked renewed determination. The coalition base on Proxima Station expanded exponentially as representatives from 17 formerly quarantined human colonies arrived alongside delegations from Concordat species who had observed the initial successes. The station, originally designed for diplomatic functions, transformed into a chaotic multidisciplinary research hub and military command center. Forlag found himself serving as a bridge between the rigorously ordered Concordat species and the improvisational human approach. His ability to translate human intuitive leaps into logical frameworks made him invaluable to both sides of the coalition. Your species' danger truly does lie in your refusal to accept limitations, he observed to Dr. Washington as they reviewed the latest containment data, even those imposed by physical reality. The human scientist smiled, an expression Forlag had come to recognize as indicating both amusement and acknowledgement. That's the kindest description of human stubbornness I've heard, Washington replied. We prefer to think of physical laws as guidelines open to creative interpretation. Creative interpretation of immutable constants seems irrational, Forlag noted. Until it works, Washington countered. Quantum tunneling was theoretical until we did it. Faster-than-light travel was impossible until we achieved it. Artificial gravity was a fantasy until we developed it. Human progress has always been driven by refusing to accept current limitations as permanent. This perspective illuminated much about human historical development. Where Cathar civilization had progressed through careful, incremental improvements to established technologies, human advancement occurred in dramatic, unpredictable bursts, often in response to crises that threatened their survival. The pattern was repeating now. Phase 1 containment had succeeded beyond initial projections, stabilizing Prometheus's expansion at current boundaries. Phase 2, the directed singularity injection, was proceeding with a 37% success metric, significantly higher than the original 23% projection. The addition of Cathar crystalline lattice harmonics had proven crucial, disrupting Prometheus's quantum tunneling capabilities more effectively than human technologies alone. Yet despite these successes, the entity continued to adapt. Each disruptive measure would work briefly before Prometheus evolved countermeasures. The coalition's advantage was narrow and constantly threatened. It's learning faster than we anticipated, Commander Vasquez admitted during a high-level strategy session. Our most recent models suggest Phase 3 redirection has dropped to 12% probability of success. The assembled representatives, Cathar, human, Medusan, Arcturian, and a dozen other species, absorb this sobering assessment. For most logical species, such diminishing returns would indicate the need to shift to preservation strategies rather than continuing an increasingly futile offensive. We need to accelerate Phase 3 development, Ambassador Nakamura stated instead. Dr. Washington's team has a theoretical approach that might significantly improve our odds. Dr. Washington activated the central holographic display, showing a complex model of space-time distortion patterns. Prometheus navigates using quantum entanglement across its distributed mass, he explained. Our current approach attempts to redirect it through conventional space-time manipulation, essentially creating a gravitational slope it would follow back to intergalactic space. The display illustrated this approach, showing gravitational waves attempting to push the entity. The limitation is energy. Creating sufficient gravitational distortion would require more energy than we can generate, even with stellar harvesting. This appears to confirm the need to consider alternative survival strategies, noted the Arcturian representative. Or, Dr. Washington continued, we change our approach entirely. Instead of pushing Prometheus out of the galaxy, we pull it. The display shifted to show a new configuration, a massive structure positioned beyond the galactic rim. This is the lighthouse, Washington explained. A hyperdimensional quantum beacon designed to exploit Prometheus's own entanglement network. Rather than fighting its navigation system, we hijack it. The energy requirements would still be prohibitive, objected the Cathar science advisor. Not if we use Prometheus's own energy against it, Washington countered. The entity converts matter to energy with unprecedented efficiency. We create a feedback loop, a quantum reflection that causes it to essentially pull itself toward the beacon. The concept was audacious to the point of absurdity by Cathar standards, creating a device to exploit weaknesses in an entity they barely understood, positioned beyond the galaxy where no civilization had permanent infrastructure, operating on theoretical principles that hadn't been field-tested. The probability of success? Forlag asked, already anticipating the answer. Initial models suggest 3.8%, Washington admitted. But with refinement and full coalition support, we believe we can increase that to approximately 6%. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the non-human representatives. Committing resources to a 6% probability directly contradicted rational strategic doctrine. 6% represents our best remaining option for complete neutralization, Commander Vasquez stated firmly. All other approaches preserve fragments at best. The Cathar Deep Archive Protocol offers 42.3% species survival, the science advisor reiterated, which drops to under 10% when accounting for Prometheus's demonstrated adaptive learning, Vasquez countered. It's already showing signs of detecting and targeting subsurface installations. The debate continued for hours, split largely along biological lines. Species with logical, sequential cognitive frameworks argued for measured withdrawal and preservation. Those with more adaptive or parallel processing systems supported the human approach. Forlag observed the familiar pattern reasserting itself, the very dynamic that had led to the human observation mandate centuries earlier. Faced with extinction, logical species became more rigidly logical, while humans became more radically innovative, each group doubling down on their core cognitive strategies. The fundamental question, Forlag finally interjected, is not the probability of success, but the definition of acceptable outcomes. For the Cathar and similar species, preserving any portion of our civilization is preferable to risking complete extinction. For humans, it appears the preservation of a fragment is considered equivalent to failure. Ambassador Nakamura nodded. That's an accurate assessment. High Prelate. Humans define survival differently. From our perspective, a civilization preserved in hibernation, reduced to a fraction of its former knowledge, complexity, and potential, has already experienced a form of extinction. You prioritize your civilization over your species. Forlag repeated his earlier realization. We prioritize what makes us human, Nakamura corrected. Our connections, our shared experience, our collective knowledge, our future potential. A remnant population preserving basic genetic material isn't humanity. It's just human DNA. The distinction illuminated the vast philosophical divide underlying the strategic disagreement. For Cathar, individual existence and species continuation were the fundamental values. For humans, existence without the full expression of their psychological and cultural essence was viewed as a type of death itself. Each species must determine its own definition of survival, Forlag concluded. The Cathar Dominion will continue supporting Phase 1 and Phase 2 operations, which have demonstrated acceptable probability metrics. Individual Cathar vessels and specialists may volunteer for Phase 3 if they choose, but the Dominion cannot commit resources to a 6% probability operation. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, a trait Forlag had come to recognize as the hallmark of effective multi-species cooperation. The Arcturians and Medusans adopted similar positions. Other species committed fully to the human plan, particularly those with compatible cognitive frameworks or those whose conventional defenses had already failed. The coalition fractured but did not break, another concept Forlag had absorbed from human organizational theory. Different components pursuing separate but complementary strategies, unified by communication and shared ultimate objectives rather than identical methodologies. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Washington approached Forlag privately. "Hi, Prelate. There's an aspect of the Lighthouse project I didn't mention in open session. The quantum reflection process. There's a 22% probability it will create a cascading dimensional rupture." Forlag processed this new information. Define cascading dimensional rupture. A chain reaction that could potentially destabilize spacetime throughout this galactic sector, Washington explained calmly. In simplest terms, we might save the galaxy by accidentally erasing a quarter of it from reality. This risk was not included in your briefing, because it would have guaranteed rejection by every logical species present, Washington admitted. "We believe the risk is manageable, but couldn't effectively communicate the mitigation strategies to species that would fixate on the raw probability." Forlag's antennae twitched in agitation. Withholding critical risk factors violates every principle of collaborative strategic planning. It does, Washington agreed without defensiveness. And if we had followed conventional disclosure protocols, we would currently be implementing a galaxy-wide retreat that guarantees fragmented survival at best. Sometimes bending the rules is the only way to change the game. "You manipulated the coalition," Forlag accused. "We maintained operational security around a developing strategy," Washington countered, using military terminology rather than acknowledging the deception. "The decision to proceed with the Lighthouse will be made with full disclosure to all participating species. But that decision wouldn't have remained viable if we'd led with the worst-case scenario." This characteristic, the human willingness to selectively share information to achieve desired outcomes, reinforced everything Elder Zeiler had warned about. They were, indeed, dangerous in ways that transcended conventional threat categories. Yet Forlag found himself unable to condemn the approach entirely. The human's core objective, total preservation rather than fragmented survival, aligned with the highest ideals of Cathar philosophy, even as their methods contradicted Cathar ethical frameworks. "I will need to inform the High Council of this additional risk factor," Forlag stated. Washington nodded. "I expected nothing less. But I ask that you also convey the context, that we're pursuing this approach not out of recklessness, but because we believe total preservation justifies extraordinary risk. The Cathar concept of justifiable risk differs significantly from the human definition," Forlag noted. "Understood. But perhaps consider that in unprecedented scenarios, unprecedented risk tolerance may be appropriate." Washington's expression conveyed both solemnity and determination. "We're not asking the Cathar to change who you are, just to recognize that this situation may require all of us to operate beyond our comfortable parameters." The conversation lingered in Forlag's mind as he returned to Cathar space to brief the High Council. The human perspective challenged foundational assumptions of Cathar strategic thinking. Their willingness to risk everything on minimal probability outcomes seemed irrational when viewed through a conventional analytical framework. Yet, as the Prometheus entity continued its inexorable advance despite the Coalition's best efforts, Forlag found himself questioning whether conventional frameworks remained applicable. If logical approaches consistently failed against this threat, did logic itself become a liability? The High Council received his report with characteristic restraint, processing the new information methodically. The human plan represents an unacceptable risk profile, Archprelate Zex concluded after careful deliberation. The Deep Archive Protocol will proceed as our primary strategy. Coalition support will continue for Phase 1 and Phase 2 operations, which have demonstrated limited but measurable effectiveness. And if those operations ultimately fail? Forlag asked, if Prometheus adapts to our countermeasures, as all evidence suggests it will, then our species survives through hibernation, Zex stated with finality. A 42.3% probability of partial preservation is preferable to a 6% probability of complete preservation with 22% risk of catastrophic space-time disruption. The logic was impeccable by Cthar standards. Yet Forlag found himself troubled by the conclusion in a way he couldn't immediately quantify. It took several cycles of reflection to identify the source of his disquiet. The Cthar were choosing certainty over possibility, a perfectly logical choice. But in doing so, they were ceding the future to the entity that threatened it. Preservation without potential for restoration was merely prolonged extinction. When Forlag returned to Proxima Station, he found the human effort had accelerated despite the coalition fracturing. The Lighthouse project had moved from theoretical design to active development. Construction vessels were already departing for positions beyond the galactic rim, carrying components manufactured through rapid fabrication techniques that sacrificed longevity for immediate functionality. We've refined the quantum reflection process, Dr. Washington explained during the project briefing. The catastrophic rupture probability has been reduced to 17.4%, and we've incorporated Cthar crystalline lattice principles into the containment fields. Without Cthar authorization, Forlag noted. Based on publicly available research from academic exchanges prior to the quarantine, Washington clarified, we're not asking the Cthar to violate your council's directives, just applying universal principles that happen to originate in your scientific tradition. This creative interpretation of intellectual boundaries typified the human approach. They operated not by breaking rules directly, but by finding spaces between rules, exploiting definitional ambiguities, and reframing limitations as opportunities. As Phase 3 preparations continued, Prometheus's advance accelerated once more. The entity had adapted to Phase 2 countermeasures, developing quantum structures that resisted singularity disruption. Coalition forces fell back to secondary containment positions, sacrificing dozens of star systems to buy time. The psychological impact was profound. Species that had committed to preservation strategies accelerated their withdrawal. Those supporting the human approach redoubled their efforts, creating a feedback loop of increasing desperation and innovation. Forlag observed this divergence with growing concern. The coalition's strength had been in its diversity of approach, complementary strategies creating redundant layers of response. As polarization increased, that complementarity deteriorated into competing, sometimes contradictory efforts. The fracturing of the response undermines collective effectiveness, he noted to Commander Vasquez during a tactical review. It's a natural response to existential pressure, she replied. Species revert to their core cognitive strategies under threat. Logical species become more rigidly logical. Emotional species become more intensely emotional. Hierarchical species become more strictly hierarchical. And humans. Vasquez's expression hardened. We become more human, more innovative, more determined, more willing to attempt the impossible. She gestured to the tactical display, where Prometheus's expansion had overtaken another containment line. The entity adapts faster than conventional countermeasures can be implemented. Only unconventional approaches offer any remaining possibility of success. The probability metrics remain unfavorable, Forlag observed. Probability is just math's way of quantifying uncertainty, Vasquez countered. It doesn't determine outcomes. It just describes possible distribution patterns. The actual outcome is binary. We succeed or we fail. And humans have a long history of achieving outcomes that probability said were nearly impossible. This perspective illuminated another fundamental difference in approach. Cthar viewed probability as a deterministic factor. If an outcome had a 6% probability, it would fail 94% of the time. Humans viewed it as a challenge. A 6% probability meant success was difficult but possible, and possibility was all they required to commit fully. The lighthouse neared completion ahead of projected timelines. Another example of humans' ability to compress development cycles through procedural shortcuts and acceptance of elevated risk. The massive structure, positioned in intergalactic space, represented the largest coordinated engineering project in known history, constructed in a fraction of the time any logical species would have deemed possible. Activation is scheduled for 36 hours from now, Dr. Washington informed the Coalition Command. All participating species should implement maximum withdrawal from potentially affected sectors. The warning carried a clear subtext. The risk of catastrophic space-time disruption remained significant despite refinements. Species that had committed to the project accepted this risk as the price of possible salvation. Those that hadn't withdrawn their assets already. Forlag found himself in an unprecedented position. The Cthar High Council had ordered all Dominion vessels to defensive positions around designated deep archive worlds, abandoning Coalition support operations entirely. Yet he remained convinced that the coordinated approach, maintaining both preservation strategies and the human offensive, offered the greatest collective chance of some form of survival. High Prelate, Ambassador Nakamura, approached him as the command center prepared for the lighthouse activation. The Cthar fleet has been recalled, yet you remain. I am evaluating the final implementation phase for intelligence purposes, Forlag stated, technically accurate, if incomplete. Nakamura's expression suggested she understood the unspoken reality. The lighthouse activation will be observable from your current position. Deep Archive Protocol would recommend withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Accurate observation requires proximity, Forlag replied. Even at elevated risk. Even then, the human ambassador studied him curiously. You've changed, High Prelate. Your risk tolerance parameters have shifted significantly since our first meeting. Forlag considered this assessment. Not changed, expanded. The unprecedented nature of the threat permits perhaps requires unprecedented response profiles. That's a very human perspective, Nakamura observed. Perhaps certain human cognitive adaptations are situationally advantageous, Forlag conceded, as certain Cthar analytical frameworks may be advantageous in other contexts. Situational cognitive flexibility, Nakamura nodded. The ability to adopt thought patterns optimized for specific challenges rather than relying exclusively on evolutionarily determined processes. It's a distinctly human trait, and perhaps why we've survived despite our comparative physical limitations. This observation crystallized something Forlag had been processing throughout the crisis. The true danger and value of humanity lay not in their technology or their physical capabilities, but in their cognitive adaptability. Their minds could shift between analytical frameworks, emotional responses, intuitive leaps, and logical progressions as circumstances required, unbounded by the evolutionary specializations that defined other sentient species. The lighthouse activates in 12 hours, Commander Vasquez announced, interrupting Forlag's reflection. All personnel not directly involved in the operation should proceed to designated shelter positions. Forlag remained in the command center as the final countdown approached. Around him, humans worked with a focused intensity that bordered on ceremonial, each performing their assigned functions with precision while maintaining a constant awareness of the collective effort. Quantum entanglement network established, reported a technician. Dimensional harmonics aligned, confirmed another. Reflection matrix charged to 87% capacity and rising, added a third. The methodical procedure belied the desperation underlying it. This was humanity's final gambit, an 8% probability of success against an entity that had defeated every conventional approach. High Prelate, Dr. Washington approached, offering a data tablet. These are the complete specifications for the neural regeneration therapy we developed for chitinous neural degradation syndrome. If something goes wrong with the lighthouse, the implication was clear. If the activation failed catastrophically, Washington wanted to ensure the Cthar would retain the medical advancement regardless. The Cthar Dominion acknowledges this contribution to our species' welfare. Forlag responded formally, accepting the tablet. The gesture embodied the contradiction at humanity's core. The same species willing to risk galactic space-time disruption also ensured their medical discoveries would survive even if they didn't. Lighthouse activation in 30 seconds, Commander Vasquez announced. All systems at optimal parameters. Quantum reflection matrix charged to full capacity. The command center fell silent as the final countdown proceeded. Displays showed the massive structure in intergalactic space powering up, channeling energy on a scale typically associated with stellar phenomena. Activation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Lighthouse activated. Quantum beacon transmitting. Entanglement network engaged. For several moments, nothing appeared to happen. Then the displays monitoring Prometheus showed a subtle shift in its expansion pattern, a barely perceptible change in direction. Confirmation, announced the sensor operator. Entity distribution pattern shifting. Outer tendrils reorienting toward the beacon. A cautious optimism spread through the command center as additional data confirmed the initial readings. The quantum reflection was working. Prometheus was responding to the beacon, its expansion now directionally biased toward intergalactic space. Phase 3 showing initial success metrics at 12%, exceeding projections, reported the analytics officer. Then, a fluctuation. The displays monitoring space-time stability around the lighthouse showed increasing distortion. Dimensional stress exceeding containment parameters, warned a technician. Reflection feedback loop intensifying beyond projected tolerances. Dr. Washington moved quickly to a control station, adjusting harmonic resonance to compensate, diverting additional power to containment fields. The adjustments appeared to stabilize the system briefly, but new fluctuations emerged almost immediately. Prometheus is adapting, Commander Vasquez observed grimly. It's modifying its quantum structure to resist the reflection. This was the fundamental challenge they had faced throughout the conflict, the entity's ability to evolve countermeasures to any strategy employed against it. The human approach had been to develop responses faster than Prometheus could adapt, but they were running out of options. We need to increase the beacon's power output, Dr. Washington decided. Override the safety limiters and channel everything into the reflection matrix. Simulation models indicate 62% probability of catastrophic containment failure if limiters are disengaged, warned the Cthar analysis system. If we don't increase power, we have 100% probability of Prometheus breaking free of the reflection influence, Vasquez countered. Disengage the limiters. The command was executed, and the displays showed power levels rising far beyond design tolerances. The lighthouse structure itself began to show signs of stress, components failing as they channeled energies they were never designed to contain. Reflection influence increasing, reported the sensor operator. Prometheus reorientation accelerating. For a moment, hope surged. The entity's mass was definitely moving, pulling away from the galactic plane toward the beacon. The human gambit appeared to be working despite the risks. Then disaster. A cascading failure rippled through the lighthouse's containment systems. The quantum reflection, no longer properly channeled, created precisely the dimensional rupture they had feared. Space-time distortion expanding from the lighthouse position, announced the sensor officer, voice steady despite the implications. Current spread rate indicates potential sectorial destabilization. A profound silence fell over the command center as the implications became clear. They had traded one extinction-level threat for another. Prometheus was being pulled toward the rupture, but the rupture itself now threatened a significant portion of the galaxy. All systems to emergency protocols, Commander Vasquez ordered, breaking the silence. Shift focus to rupture containment. Redirect all available energy to stabilization fields. Unstable spacetime cannot be contained with conventional energy fields, objected the Cthar analysis system. Then we need unconventional fields, Dr. Washington countered. The crystalline lattice harmonics. If we modify them to create a resonance pattern counter to the rupture's frequency. What followed was a desperate improvisation session unlike anything Forlag had witnessed. Humans and their allies proposed and implemented ideas that violated fundamental physical principles as understood by conventional science. They deployed technologies in ways their designers had never intended, combined incompatible systems through jury-rigged interfaces, and channeled energies through pathways that should have failed instantly. By any logical analysis, their efforts were doomed. The rupture continued to expand, consuming the lighthouse itself and creating a growing void in reality. Prometheus was indeed being drawn into the rupture, but at the cost of destabilizing the surrounding space-time fabric. We need a focal point, Dr. Washington declared after hours of failed containment attempts. Something to create a resonance pattern that can stabilize the rupture boundaries. The crystalline matrix of Cthar vessels provides the necessary lattice structure, Forlag suggested, but would require precise positioning within the rupture's influence radius. Within the rupture itself, Washington corrected. The stabilization field would need to be generated from inside the distortion to create the necessary counter-resonance. The implication was clear. Any vessel entering the rupture would almost certainly be destroyed. I will volunteer the logical progression, Forlag declared. Its experimental shielding configuration might survive long enough to establish the resonance pattern. Commander Vasquez studied the Cthar with newfound respect. That's contrary to your council's directive, High Prelate. The directive prioritizes Cthar survival, Forlag acknowledged. This action serves that priority, albeit through unconventional means. The Deep Archive Protocol preserves our species, but sacrifices our place in galactic civilization. If stabilizing the rupture offers any probability of preserving both, logic dictates attempting it. The redefinition of logical to include self-sacrifice for uncertain benefit would have been rejected by the High Council. Yet Forlag found the reasoning sound, another indication of how his own cognitive framework had expanded through exposure to human approaches. The plan came together with the improvisational speed that characterized the entire human operation. The logical progression would enter the rupture carrying a modified crystalline matrix tuned to the specific dimensional frequencies of the distortion. If successful, it would create a stabilization field that would contain, though not repair, the damaged spacetime. Probability of success? Forlag asked as final preparations were completed. Conventional models suggest 4.2%, Dr. Washington admitted. But conventional models have consistently underestimated effectiveness when dealing with transdimensional phenomena. So the actual probability is unknown, Forlag concluded. Unknown doesn't mean impossible, Washington countered, just unmeasurable by current methods. The distinction was quintessentially human, embracing uncertainty not as a limitation, but as possibility unrestricted by calculated probabilities. As Forlag prepared to board his vessel, Ambassador Nakamura approached. The Cthar Dominion will be informed of your sacrifice, High Prelate, she assured him. Whatever the outcome, your actions will be recorded in human archives as exemplifying the highest ideals of sentient cooperation. My actions are logical given the parameters of the situation, Forlag replied. Though I acknowledge the definition of logical has expanded considerably through this collaboration. Nakamura smiled, an expression Forlag had come to recognize as indicating both acknowledgement and appreciation. Perhaps that's the greatest discovery to emerge from this crisis, that logic itself is not a fixed framework but an adaptive one. that what seems irrational in one context may be the height of reason in another. An insight that might have prevented the human observation mandate centuries ago, Forlag observed, or one that could only have emerged through the crisis we now face, Nakamura countered. Some understandings can only be reached through direct experience. The logical progression departed Proxima Station amid solemn ceremony. Another human custom Forlag had come to appreciate. The cognitive function of ritual in creating shared meaning and collective purpose was something Cthar society, with its emphasis on pure efficiency, had never fully developed. As the vessel approached the rupture's perimeter, Forlag observed the phenomenon directly for the first time. The void was not darkness, but an absence more fundamental, a region where the basic properties of space-time had ceased to function predictably. Within it, Prometheus was being drawn and disassembled, its mass converted into energy that fed the rupture's expansion. Stabilization matrix charged to full capacity, reported his Cthar science officer. Resonance frequencies aligned to rupture harmonics. Proceed at 1/4 acceleration, Forlag ordered. Maintain continuous telemetry with coalition command. The logical progression crossed the rupture boundary, and reality itself seemed to shudder around them. Conventional sensors failed immediately. Gravitational systems fluctuated wildly. The crystalline lattice that formed the vessel's structural framework began to resonate with the dimensional frequencies surrounding them, producing harmonic patterns no Cthar had ever observed. Deploy stabilization field, Forlag commanded as the ship penetrated deeper into the distortion. The modified matrix activated, projecting a counter-resonance pattern designed to neutralize the rupture's expansive frequencies. For several moments, nothing appeared to change. Then subtle shifts in the surrounding distortion became visible, areas where the chaotic energy patterns began to organize into more stable configurations. Initial stabilization effects detected, confirmed the science officer. Field influence expanding at projected rates. Hope flickered briefly. Then systems throughout the vessel began to fail as the extreme conditions overwhelmed even the most robust Cthar engineering. Power fluctuations cascaded through critical systems. Structural integrity compromised as the crystalline lattice vibrated beyond design tolerances. Maintain field projection at all costs, Forlag ordered as emergency alerts filled the command deck. Divert all remaining power to the stabilization matrix. His crew complied without hesitation, the Cthar commitment to duty transcending even survival instinct. As systems failed around them, they focused solely on maintaining the stabilization field that represented the galaxy's final hope. The last readings transmitted from the logical progression before communication failed showed encouraging patterns. The rupture's expansion had slowed measurably. Whether this represented temporary containment or permanent stabilization remained uncertain, but the sacrifice had not been in vain. As the vessel's structural integrity reached critical failure, Forlag experienced an insight that transcended logical analysis. The greatest strength of conscious life in the universe was not technological advancement or resource accumulation, but the capacity to assign meaning beyond individual survival, to recognize value in connection, continuation, and possibility. Humans had understood this instinctively, operating from this perspective even when it appeared irrational by conventional metrics. The Cthar and similar species had developed it as an intellectual principle but struggled to integrate it into their decision frameworks when survival was threatened. Perhaps this was the true significance of the unlikely alliance forged in crisis. Not just the practical combination of human innovation and Cthar precision, but the philosophical synthesis of approaches that alone were insufficient, but together created new possibility. Structural integrity at 12% and falling, reported the engineering officer calmly. Stabilization field maintaining optimal parameters. Continue field projection until final system failure, Forlag instructed. It has been my honor to serve with this crew. The formal acknowledgement, another concept borrowed from human practice, felt appropriate in this final moment. The science officer's response was equally unexpected by traditional Cthar standards. The honor has been shared, High Prelate, for the continuation of all. The phrase, neither purely logical nor purely emotional, captured the essence of what they had learned through collaboration with humanity. Existence was not merely a binary state to be preserved, but a complex web of relationships, knowledge, and potential to be nurtured. As the logical progression disintegrated within the rupture, its stabilization field remained intact long enough to achieve what coalition sensors would later confirm as the decisive effect: a self-sustaining resonance pattern that contained the dimensional damage while allowing Prometheus to be drawn completely into the void. In the cycles that followed, the coalition's analytical systems would determine that the rupture had been permanently stabilized, not repaired, but contained within a fixed perimeter that would make that section of intergalactic space permanently inaccessible, but prevent further expansion. The cost had been enormous. 17 star systems lost to Prometheus before containment. 3 more consumed by the dimensional rupture. Countless lives sacrificed in desperate, delaying actions and risky technological deployments. The logical progression and its crew among them. Yet the galaxy itself had survived, not just physically, but as a connected community of civilizations that might otherwise have fractured into isolated, retreating remnants. The shared crisis had 4 species that had maintained careful separation for millennia to collaborate, exchange knowledge, and recognize the value in their cognitive differences. When Forlag's final report reached the Cthar High Council, it sparked profound debate about the Dominion's place in the post-crisis galactic community. The Deep Archive Protocol was formally suspended. The proposal to re-establish the human observation mandate was unanimously rejected. In its place, a new framework emerged, one recognizing that different species' cognitive specializations represented not competitive advantages, but complementary approaches to a complex universe. Logical precision alone could not address all challenges, nor could unconstrained innovation without analytical rigor. The strengths of each approach became most apparent when combined in collaborative frameworks. 3 standard cycles after the Prometheus crisis, representatives from 27 species, including the formerly quarantined humans, gathered to establish the Galactic Cooperative, replacing the fractured Concordat. The founding charter explicitly recognized cognitive diversity as a collective resource to be cultivated rather than a source of potential conflict to be managed through separation. Elder Zyler, representing the Cthar at Ambassador Nakamura's request, delivered an address that would be recorded in multiple species' historical archives. The Prometheus crisis revealed what should have been apparent from our earliest interactions: that no single species possesses a complete framework for understanding or navigating the universe. What we perceived as dangerous in humanity was merely unfamiliar. Their acceptance of risk, their emotional decision-making, their willingness to attempt the statistically improbable. Equally, what humans found frustrating in logical species like the Cthar: our methodical analysis, our emphasis on proven approaches, our aversion to unnecessary risk, provided essential balance to their creative chaos. The stabilization of the dimensional rupture required both human intuitive leaps and Cthar precision engineering. Neither alone would have sufficed. High Prelate Forlag recognized this complementarity before most of us. His final transmission, preserved through coalition monitoring systems, offers wisdom that must guide our new cooperative. Logic that cannot adapt to unprecedented circumstances becomes illogical. Innovation without analytical foundation becomes recklessness. The greatest danger to sentient life is not any species or technology, but cognitive rigidity, the failure to recognize when established patterns of thought have become limitations rather than strengths. As we establish this new framework for galactic cooperation, let us remember that diversity, not just of biology or culture, but of fundamental cognitive approach, is our greatest collective resource against a universe that will continue to present challenges beyond any single species' comprehension. The address was met with the unique gestures of acknowledgement from each species present. The formal antennae dip of the Cthar, the resonant hum of the Medusans, the synchronized light patterns of the Arcturians, and the applause of humans. In the decades that followed, Forlag's insights shaped the development of interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. The Cthar Dominion established permanent exchange programs with human colonies, each species learning from the other's approach. Cthar analytical rigor enhanced human scientific endeavors, while human creativity challenged Cthar cultural assumptions about immutable limitations. Joint research initiatives combined Cthar precision with human intuition, accelerating technological development across multiple fields. The dimensional stabilization techniques pioneered during the crisis led to controlled micro-ruptures that revolutionized energy production, transportation, and communication. Most significantly, the psychological barriers between species began to erode. The rigid categorization of approaches as logical or intuitive, methodical or innovative, gave way to recognition of a spectrum of cognitive styles, each with situational advantages. A century after the Prometheus crisis, a joint Cthar-human expedition departed for intergalactic space, the first of its kind. Their mission: to establish monitoring outposts beyond the contained rupture, ensuring Prometheus or similar entities could never again approach the galaxy undetected. The expedition vessels, Cthar precision engineering combined with human adaptive design principles, represented the physical embodiment of the cooperation that had emerged from crisis. Their crews, mixed species working in complementary roles, exemplified the cognitive diversity now recognized as essential for addressing the unknown. As the expedition prepared to depart, a commemorative ceremony was held at Proxima Station, the same facility where Forlag had first encountered humanity's chaotic innovation. A memorial display held artifacts from the crisis, including fragments of the logical progression recovered from the rupture's perimeter and the data tablet containing the neural regeneration therapy that Dr. Washington had entrusted to Forlag. Ambassador Nakamura, now in the latter phase of her life cycle, addressed the gathered representatives. Her words echoed Forlag's final insights. We gather today to commemorate not just those lost in the Prometheus crisis, but a profound shift in our collective understanding. For millennia, different species viewed their cognitive approaches as competitive advantages to be protected or limitations to be overcome. The crisis revealed them instead as complementary perspectives, pieces of a greater whole that, when combined, allow us to address challenges beyond any single framework. High Prelate Forlag embodied this realization when he volunteered the logical progression for what conventional Cthar logic would have deemed an irrational sacrifice. In adapting his understanding of logic itself to incorporate broader definitions of value, purpose, and acceptable risk, he demonstrated the very cognitive flexibility that defines sentient life at its best. As this expedition departs, they carry with them not just the technology and knowledge of multiple species, but the philosophical integration that represents our greatest collective achievement. They venture into the unknown not as Cthar or humans or Medusans or Arcturians, but as representatives of a galactic community that has learned to value its cognitive diversity as its greatest strength. The expedition commander, a young Cthar who had studied under scholars familiar with Forlag's work, offered the formal response. We undertake this mission in the spirit of complementary cognition that emerged from the Prometheus crisis. Where our predecessors saw difference as potential conflict, we recognize it as essential diversity. Where they established quarantines to manage the unfamiliar, we establish exchanges to integrate perspectives. The question posed a century ago, why humanity is the galaxy's most dangerous species, has been answered in unexpected ways. Their danger lay not in malice or aggression, but in their capacity to challenge fundamental assumptions, to attempt the statistically improbable, and to redefine possibility itself. Yet this danger proved to be precisely what the galaxy needed when faced with an unprecedented threat. And in recognizing this, we have discovered that every species possesses cognitive approaches that appear dangerous when viewed through unfamiliar frameworks, but essential when challenges transcend any single perspective. We venture beyond our galaxy, not despite our differences, but because of them, each species contributing unique insights that together form a more complete understanding than any could achieve alone. As the expedition departed, their vessels displaying the integrated insignia of multiple civilizations, they represented the culmination of the philosophical journey that had begun with Forlag's initial investigation of human expansion patterns. The galaxy's most dangerous species had indeed proven to be humanity, but not through conquest or aggression. Their danger lay in their ability to disrupt established patterns of thought, to challenge accepted limitations, and to imagine possibilities beyond conventional frameworks. This cognitive flexibility, initially perceived as unpredictable chaos by logical species, had ultimately saved the galaxy by enabling responses that transcended traditional approaches. Yet the crisis had revealed an equally important truth, that this very flexibility required the stabilizing influence of more structured cognition to achieve its potential. Human intuitive leaps needed Kthar analytical rigor to become viable solutions. Kthar precision engineering needed human creative adaptation to address unprecedented challenges. In the Memorial Hall at Proxima Station, a simple display summarized this understanding. It contained only two items: a fragment of crystalline lattice from the logical progression and a handwritten note from Dr. Washington found among his personal effects after his death. The note contained a single sentence that captured the essence of what the galaxy had learned. Our greatest strength lies not in any single approach to understanding the universe, but in our collective capacity to transcend the limitations of our individual perspectives when faced with challenges that defy conventional comprehension. Beneath this, a Kthar inscription added the complementary thought: logic that cannot incorporate new data is not logic but rigidity. Innovation that cannot build on established understanding is not creativity but chaos. Together, they form a complete approach to a universe that will always present phenomena beyond our current comprehension. This philosophical integration, the recognition that different cognitive approaches represented complementary rather than competing frameworks, became the foundation of the galaxy's ongoing development. Species that had once viewed each other with suspicion or incomprehension now actively sought diverse perspectives when addressing complex challenges. The human observation mandate, once established out of fear of unpredictability, became a historical curiosity, a reminder of a time when difference was perceived as danger rather than diversity. In its place, exchange programs flourished, with species deliberately seeking exposure to cognitive approaches unlike their own. Kthar researchers studied human artistic expression to expand their understanding of intuitive pattern recognition. Human scientists incorporated Kthar analytical frameworks to add rigor to their creative leaps. Medusan collective consciousness techniques merged with Arcturian individual specialization approaches to create new forms of collaborative problem-solving. The expedition to intergalactic space represented the physical manifestation of this philosophical evolution, a deliberate combining of diverse cognitive approaches to address the unknown. Their mission, not just to monitor for threats like Prometheus, but to expand understanding beyond the boundaries of any single species' perception. As they passed beyond the galactic rim, into regions no sentient species had explored, they carried with them the integrated wisdom of dozens of civilizations. Whatever they encountered, whether benign wonders or existential threats, would be addressed not through the limited framework of any individual species, but through the combined perspectives of a truly integrated galactic community. In this way, the crisis that had nearly ended galactic civilization instead transformed it, not through technological revolution or political restructuring, but through the more fundamental revolution in how different species perceived and valued their cognitive differences. The galaxy's most dangerous species had catalyzed its most profound evolution, from a collection of isolated, competing civilizations to an integrated community that recognized cognitive diversity as its greatest collective strength. The danger humanity represented Their refusal to accept limitations, their emotional decision-making, their willingness to attempt the statistically improbable, had proved to be precisely the spark needed to ignite this transformation. As the intergalactic expedition ventured into the void between galaxies, they embodied the culmination of this journey, not just physically leaving the galaxy behind, but philosophically transcending the limitations that had defined it. Whatever they discovered in the vast unknown, they would face it not as separate species with competing approaches, but as representatives of a civilization that had learned to integrate the best of all its component perspectives. The true legacy of the Prometheus crisis was not just survival, but evolution. The recognition that in a universe of infinite complexity, no single cognitive framework could ever be sufficient. Only by combining the logical precision of the Cthar, the adaptive creativity of humans, the collective consciousness of the Medusans, the specialized perception of the Arcturians, and countless other approaches, could sentient life hope to navigate the challenges that lay beyond current comprehension. In this profound integration of previously separate perspectives, the galaxy had not just survived an existential threat. It had emerged stronger, more adaptable, and better prepared for whatever the universe might present next. The danger humanity represented had ultimately proven to be the catalyst for the galaxy's greatest strength, its capacity to transcend the limitations of any single perspective and embrace the complementary nature of diverse cognitive approaches. As Ambassador Nakamura had observed in her final address before retirement, we feared humanity because they refused to accept limitations that seemed immutable to logical species. We quarantined them because their unpredictability defied our analytical frameworks. Yet when faced with a threat that transcended all conventional approaches, it was precisely this refusal to accept limitations that offered our only path to survival. The lesson of Prometheus is not that humans were right and others wrong, or that emotion trumps logic, or that innovation outweighs precision. It is that these apparent dichotomies are illusions, false choices that limited our collective potential. The true path forward lies in recognizing that different cognitive approaches are not competing frameworks, but complementary perspectives, each revealing aspects of reality that others might miss. In embracing this truth, we have not just survived an existential threat. We have evolved beyond the limitations that made such threats existential in the first place. Whatever challenges the universe presents next, we will face them not as separate species with competing approaches, but as an integrated civilization that values cognitive diversity as its greatest collective strength. This understanding, this profound integration of previously separate perspectives, represented the galaxy's most significant evolutionary leap since the development of interstellar travel itself. Not a technological revolution, but a philosophical one that redefined how different species perceive themselves and each other. The monument eventually erected at the site of the dimensional rupture captured this transformation in its inscription, written in a unified symbolic language that had emerged from the crisis. Here, at the boundary of what was once thought impossible, diverse minds united to transcend the limitations of their individual perspectives. In facing extinction, they discovered integration. In confronting the unknown, they forged connection. In accepting the value of approaches unlike their own, they evolved beyond the constraints that had defined them. May all who venture beyond our galaxy carry with them this wisdom, that our greatest strength lies not in any single approach to understanding the universe, but in our collective capacity to transcend the limitations of our individual perspectives when faced with challenges that defy conventional comprehension. Thus, the galaxy's most dangerous species ultimately proved to be its most valuable, not despite their differences from logical species, but because of them. And in recognizing this truth, a new era of galactic civilization began. One defined not by competition or isolation, but by the deliberate integration of diverse cognitive approaches in service of a shared journey into the infinite unknown. Humanity's danger, their refusal to accept limitations, their emotional decision-making, their willingness to attempt the statistically improbable, had catalyzed the galaxy's most profound evolution. And in embracing rather than fearing these qualities, all species had discovered something fundamental about the nature of sentient life itself. That true intelligence lies not in any single cognitive approach, but in the capacity to transcend the limitations of individual perspective. This was the legacy of High Prelate Forlag, Dr. Washington, Commander Vasquez, Ambassador Nakamura, and countless others who had faced the impossible together. A galaxy transformed not just by survival, but by the profound philosophical integration that had made survival possible. As the intergalactic expedition passed beyond the last star system of the Milky Way, carrying with them the combined wisdom, technology, and cognitive frameworks of dozens of civilizations, they represented not just the culmination of this journey, but the beginning of a new one, into a universe of infinite complexity, faced not with the limited perspective of any single species, but with the integrated understanding of a truly unified galactic community. The galaxy's most dangerous species had ultimately proven to be its most necessary catalyst, the spark that ignited a transformation beyond what any logical analysis could have predicted. And in this unexpected evolution lay the true answer to the question that had begun Forlag's journey: why humanity is the galaxy's most dangerous species. They were dangerous because they refused to accept limitations. They were dangerous because they followed emotion as readily as logic. They were dangerous because they attempted the statistically improbable when rational analysis suggested withdrawal. And the galaxy needed precisely this danger, this refusal to accept conventional boundaries, when faced with a threat that transcended conventional understanding. In the complementary integration of humanity's chaotic innovation and the Ktharas' logical precision, along with countless other cognitive approaches from species across the galaxy, lay a new definition of intelligence itself. Not the rigid application of any single framework, but the flexible integration of diverse perspectives in service of challenges that transcend individual comprehension. This was the galaxy's true evolutionary leap, not a technological revolution, but a philosophical transformation that redefined the relationship between different modes of thought. And in this transformation lay the seeds of a civilization capable of facing whatever lay beyond the boundaries of current understanding, not through the limited lens of any single perspective, but through the integrated wisdom of all.